Thank you so much for joining us for another edition of All Angles. I'm Dion Jax Miller. Well, PETROJAM still on the national agenda. This after revelations before the Public Accounts Committee of Parliament last week that the former Human Resources Manager had received a settlement agreement that included a non-disclosure clause. Well, following widespread outrage, details of the agreement have indeed been made public to even more outrage. Now, joining us this evening to talk about some of the issues, we have Member of Parliament for South East St Andrew, Julian Robinson. He's also the opposition spokesman on science and technology. We have with us as well political commentator Nadine Spence, as well as Executive Director of Jamaica's National Integrity Action, Professor Trevor Monroe. First, so Dashan Hendricks walks us through a timeline.
For Yolande Ramarak, the association with PETROJAM began in 2017, her employment starting on January 30 when she was hired as Manager, Human Resource Development and Administration on $10.6 million per year. Then, 3 days later, things changed. February 2, 2017, Ramarak received and signed a letter dated January 30 advising her that she will be on permanent staff as of February 13. Her salary jumped then to $12.98 million per annum. The General Manager, Floyd Grindley, also signed that letter, and 11 days later, she was a permanent staff after her 4-month probationary period was waived on the request of the General Manager. Then, fast forward, her troubles began. On August 24, 2018, disciplinary charges were laid against Ms. Ramarak for breaches of the company's policies, dishonesty, gross negligence, and incompetence. Hearing dates to deal with the charges were set for September 10 to 14, 2018, but those dates were postponed because Ms. Ramarak's legal representatives were not available. New dates were set, October 26, 29 and November 1, but the November 1 date was cancelled due to the unavailability of Ms. Ramarak's attorney. However, 4 days before the hearings were to be held, a settlement. Ms. Ramarak's attorney on October 22 made a proposal asking for the settlement to include an appropriate release and a discharge and a confidentiality agreement. Then, 1 day before the first scheduled hearing, on October 25, settlement discussions took place. The terms proposed by Ms. Ramarak's attorney were for her to resign in exchange for 2 years' salary and outstanding benefits and entitlements. However, the parties were unable to agree and the disciplinary hearing proceeded on October 26 and 29. Then on November 14, 2018, the settlement agreement was signed by Ms. Ramarak, a witness, and the General Manager to pay her 8 months' salary as well as other sums. That agreement was approved just a day later on November 15, 2018. It was exactly 1 day before the November 16, 2018 date when the first draft of the Auditor General's report was provided to PETROJAM's General Manager, highlighting a number of breaches. Then, 6 days later, on November 22, the payout settlement was generated, showing Ramarak's total payout was $13.4 million. The total settlement was $4.2 million after deductions of $5.9 million. Then on December 7, 2018, the first of 2 payments were made, totaling $3.5 million. The second was paid on December 10, a $689,000 payment. The payments were made directly to Ramarak's attorney, the Finance Ministry indicating that the settlement was an internal matter which did not require its approval.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Now, one of the questions that has been asked is how could PETROJAM decide to enter into a settlement agreement involving millions of dollars, $10.1 million in terms of the settlement itself, $2.7 million in terms of performance incentive, given the fact that she had 19 serious disciplinary charges against her. The Prime Minister said in Parliament last week that's because a cost-benefit analysis indicated it was best for PETROJAM to do so. That raised again earlier today at the Public Accounts Committee of Parliament.
Who did this cost-benefit analysis? Who is the source of this cost-benefit analysis? Who Who is the technical person that did this?
The cost-benefit analysis was prepared internally by myself and Mr. Watson in consultation with external counsel. The exercise was to compare the settlement amount with the total cost, total estimated cost, to take the matter all the way to the IDT, right? You had also mentioned that
who asked you to prepare it on that basis?
The instructions came from Mr. Watson to prepare the document, right?
How do you explain this 60% chance of her being successful, which you have used in the calculation, even though procedurally PETROJAM was impeccable, and in terms of the 19 charges, on multiple of those 19, almost all 19, were the basis for dismissal for cause and without any further payment and without notice?
The legal advice was that the IDT is very employee-centric. There is almost a bias towards the employee, and even the slightest procedural breach can tip the scales in favor of the employee.
The effect of that would be, no matter how egregious the conduct of a public official employed to a public body, if they make a fuss about being terminated and get a lawyer on board to drag out the proceedings by not being available for the scheduled dates and so on, a cost-benefit analysis would warrant them being paid a multi-million-dollar settlement for termination. That is the precedent that is being set in this case by the decision that was taken to settle with this lady on these terms.
I was advised that according to Labor Code 22 or one of them, even though you have that in your letter of employment, you cannot summarily dismiss. You have to still go through a process. The staff morale was very much down. This lady was coming to work every single day, basically filling up a slot and preventing us from moving on with the business. And that is the basis of looking at it. That
approach is a recipe for impunity. That approach is a recipe for no accountability. And that approach is for a recipe for rewarding corruption, in my opinion.
All right, remember you can tweet along with us. Our hashtag is TVJ All Angles. And just to let our viewers know, we did invite the Office of the Prime Minister to send a representative. The Prime Minister, until tomorrow, still the Energy Minister. Professor Trevor Monroe, let me start with you, because I was watching your face there when the explanation was being given that there's no point essentially in going to the IDT because it's employee-centric, gonna fine for the employee and against PETROJAM. So let's just pay Ms. Ramarak and done.
It's obviously a slander against the IDT. Each panel in the Industrial Disputes Tribunal is made up of 3 persons, one nominated by the Jamaica Employers Federation, another by the trade unions, and a third chosen by the Ministry of Labour. I've been before the IDT, and they are very, very scrupulous in hearing the evidence, hearing the witnesses, and coming to a balanced and conclusion. So I think it's unfair to say that. There are many rulings of the IDT which don't go in favor of the workers, and it's just not fair. And the point about this settlement, a 60-40 chance that the IDT will rule in favor of the employee, I beg to disagree. The lawyers who advise that this is so, their advice needs to be put on the table of Parliament and made available to the Jamaican people. I estimate no more than a 10% chance, given the fact that PETROJAM followed to the T the procedures required by Section 22 of the Labour Code. And secondly, the fact that the substantive charges, all 19 of them, have been substantiated in large measure by the Auditor General's report. And the evidence substantiating those allegations would have been available to the management of PETROJAM and therefore available for use in a disciplinary hearing. So we also need, Dion, if I may suggest, that the notes of the hearings, the 2-day hearings, the 26th and the 25th of October, the notes of those 2 days of disciplinary hearings need also to be made available to the public, because I cannot accept that, given the procedural correctness of PETROJAM, given the substantive allegations being supported by evidence, that this could be the reason for not proceeding in the way that the codes of the country require. That if you can't settle disciplinary hearing, you have a right of appeal.
Nadine Spence.
I'm just thinking through all that was said. Firstly, it sounds to me like this is just poor decision making, as if the people who have the wherewithal to think through the matters at hand, and then come to a decision, do not have the capacity to make a decision such as this one. If you have an employee who is brought before a disciplinary committee and 19 infractions, and an employee who is preventing productivity and who is holding up the business of the entity, and an employee who clearly is marred in a kind of national discussion that is putting your organization under a lot of scrutiny, how do you dismiss that employee in the way that was done without thinking that you're going to awaken further questions about the decisions that you took?
Hold that thought for me. Let me just go to break, and we'll come back, pick up with Julian Robinson, and continue with our panelists. Remember, our hashtag is TVJ All Angles. We'll soon come.